When I started looking into your work and how vast, how much you communicate with your platform, I knew you were West Coast based. And then I looked into it again for this interview, and I realized that you were now East Coast and that you were in Virginia, like you were right in the backyard. I was like, well, how perfect is that? Like, I wanted you to talk anyway, regardless of where you were. And now people can actually like straight out get in touch with you on the East Coast.
That's true. Right.
So epic and so awesome. All right, folks. This is the first of hopefully many conversations. We are here with Christie Fleetwood, and we're going to talk today. Our series is going into the different areas of holistic modalities, so different holistic practitioners. We don't get a lot of information out there that actually tells us the differences between these two in a way that's integrative, out of respect for everybody's modality. So instead of just putting out more information about each individual thing, I wanted to post a conversation where we actually talk and examine those similarities and differences. So we are going to talk to, and Christie, you are an ND, correct? That's your abbreviation?
Correct. Yes, okay. Naturopathic doctor.
All right. So out of respect for that, we're talking about the lineage that you have moving from being a pharmacist to your current practitioner status. And I think this is going to be a very fruitful conversation, especially for people who might feel stuck where they're at with maybe their many certifications, or they're in a mainstream job they don't like, and moving from there to something a little bit more in accordance to their values, and serving people with medical and with natural solutions. All right, okay. So why don't we open up this conversation with that? Do you want to go into maybe what was your mindset when you decided to change it up?
Wow. Okay, so when I decided to leave the profession of pharmacy, I had been in pharmacy for 10 years. And during that time, I'd had a niggling suspicion in the back of my mind, nothing concrete, just this sort of niggle that was sort of, hey, these people aren't getting better. I signed up to be a pharmacist to help people heal. And yet they're coming in with now 2 prescriptions for one indication, say high blood pressure. They'd start off with 1 prescription and come in with a higher dose of that prescription. And then the next trip, it's 2 prescriptions. And then the next trip, it's 2 prescriptions for high blood pressure. And now they've got cholesterol issues. And then the next trip, it's high blood pressure, cholesterol, and type 2 diabetes. That's a really, really common progression. Okay, I saw it over and over, and like, what's going on? And even with acute things, like ear infections, the same kid would come in for the same antibiotic multiple times in the same year for the same diagnosis. And I'm thinking, there's something. What's missing? What's missing? And of course, I think the things that send us into the avocation that our passions call us into are traumas that we go through, So I had a significant emotional trauma in my mid-20s. That's a conversation for another time, but it actually fills in the background or the backstory for why I do what I do now. Because my niche now is talking to people about the diseases of the drugs. That's my alliterative way of saying iatrogenesis. Iatrogenesis means harm by medicine. It's an inescapable potential. And this is not medical negligence. This is the right drug or the right procedure done at the right time on the right person. Everything is done just right, and there is still a negative outcome. And we think of that as being something life-threatening, but it doesn't have to be life-threatening right away. It can be life-diminishing, life-restricting, like the person who started off with high blood pressure and now, after given the right medicine, has 3 different diagnoses. and 3 different specialists managing those chronic disease states. So my shtick, if you will, is teaching people the rest of the story about their drugs. And the second part is helping them understand what they need to do to reverse the entire process of that chronic disease or diseases. Okay, so back to my mid-20s. I got really sick after an emotional trauma that I just ended up mind-body stuff. I started stuffing all of my emotional pain into my own body. And of course, went to the doctors and took their medications and could not get well because it wasn't a physical problem. It was a physical manifestation of a mental, emotional trauma, which was the death of my child and the divorce from my then husband that I thought was my soulmate. And I mean, my family of origin fell apart. My nuclear family was gone. So I had been failed by the very medical system that I was part of. And at that point, I changed jobs just to have a little bit less stress in my life because I was working at Farmore. I don't know if you remember Farmore, but that was a fairly new company here in Virginia, and we were filling like 350 prescriptions a day. That's a lot. That's a lot of prescriptions. So I dropped to a job in a grocery store where I only was filling about 30 prescriptions a day. I was like bored out of my mind, but it was very good because I decided to study what we had been doing before conventional medicine as we know it came to be. And I was fascinated studying Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, reflexology, healing touch, massage, Reiki, homeopathy, aromatherapy. What else?
Herbalism.
Herbalism. Yes, that was huge. That was huge. Orthomolecular medicine.
Yeah.
Right. So all the different things. And I began to get better just through self-study. And then there was a series of events, that happened in sequence that I couldn't avoid, that started leading me to the path of naturopathic medicine. So I sold everything that I owned and left everyone that I knew and moved to the other side of the universe to go back to school full time and become a doctor of naturopathic medicine. Very, very different paths. Pharmacy, naturopathic medicine. These are like 180 degrees different one from the other. But the two combined in my brain have created a really fantastic way of educating the public on how to change their lifestyles for a different outcome in their chronic disease progression.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it actually sounds really clear how the two fit together because with your background in pharmacology and in maths, the ability to actually hand out medications and, fill medications, you're more than able to reference the medications so that you can help people see the relationships between the medications. Like you said earlier in the conversation, build more relationship around the drugs and get to know them really well, and I want to move the conversation if we can to that place, because in the customer's mind, when we are in these situations with doctors, we don't really question those decisions by doctors on what we should be taking. Mm-hmm. So, how do we fill that space more so that they feel more empowered in their decision making? That's one aspect of it. For sure. The other is this idea that you bring up really beautifully in your personal story of like chapters in our life. Do you feel like that plays a role too? Are there certain things that people should pay closer attention to in their own advocacy and their own life journey?
Yeah, I love the way you frame that. That trauma changed my world. Like my world kind of imploded. And it shook me to my very core and had me question everything that I had ever believed about myself, about the world, about God, about you name it. I questioned it. And those are the times in life, and granted, this is a first world problem, right? I've got my needs met. I've got a house to live in. I've got food. I've got water. I've got whatever. But when we are so shaken, that kind of traumatic event can often be what propels us into something that is truly life-changing, not just for ourselves, but for others that we encounter. It's like we're now driven to help people live differently after such an event. And I've witnessed this with many of my own patients and clients through the years. They come to me when they're desperate. They've tried everything else, and then they finally hear about, well, there's this other doctor. She's some kind of other doctor, homeopathic, neuropathic, natural, I don't know. She's some other kind of doctor, but she's a pharmacist. So she'll understand what you're talking about. And at this point, I get to pick and choose who I work with. And so I'm working with the people who are highly motivated. They're in the ditch. They've just rolled over in that nasty ditch, and they realize that there is somebody that can help pull them out. But they have to do a lot of work. And they're willing, they're motivated because they're just that desperate. There are so many different modalities. You started talking about modalities. There's so many different ways to help people heal. But really, the ultimate thing is the person has to do their own individual work. And all of the fun things that we can offer them are kind of there to entertain them while they do their own healing.
Yeah.
That was actually a phrase that one of my instructors used in my final year of naturopathic medical school. And he said, you know, the doctor's job is to entertain the patient while nature does the healing work. Great. You could have told me this in year one. It saved me a lot of trouble.
Yeah, but I think so many people they don't feel empowered enough to really understand their place or their role in their own self-determination.
Right.
I think that when we hear enough people who say like, well, the doctor said that, I had this procedure done and that in a couple of years, it probably wouldn't be as good as it was when it was first done, or I got this shot and it feels great, but it's not going to feel great in a couple of weeks when it wears off.
Right.
So can you speak to that a little bit, kind of that mentality shift? I don't think anybody wants to be on these drugs, but once they are, they're pretty much stuck in that motion. So can we speak to that space that can happen in that advocacy part before these decisions are made, before they really make the decisions? Because I know people have had surgeries postponed because of natural treatments. People are putting together more protocols to think about their things before they get into these chronic life conditions.
Right. So if this were a perfect world, we wouldn't have to have this conversation. But if this were the world according to Fleetwood, I think everybody
I like that.
should be seen by a natural health practitioner before entering the conventional medical model. I think everyone would agree, even doctors, nurses, physicians assistants, pharmacists, everybody in the conventional medical model would agree that the system is broken. And back to iatrogenesis, that is either the third leading cause of death in America every year, right after cancer and heart disease, or the number one cause of death in America, harm by medicine. And the system is broken. It is fantastic for urgent care or emergencies. I'm actually a whole lot cooler than I look. I ride a motorcycle. It's a beautiful British bike. If I am sideswiped by a truck, the last people I want coming to my aid would be natural healthcare practitioners. I want emergency medicine in an emergency. But when you start applying the emergency fix to the chronic issue, you end up making as many problems as you're correcting. And there is not one drug, there is not a drug on the market that can reverse the problem. And even when you're thinking about antibiotics, well, you know, what about when I get sick? What about when I get strep throat? I need some amoxicillin, don't I? That'll fix the problem. Okay, well, ask why you got strep throat. Strep happens to be your own flora in your own mouth and throat. It's not like you got something icky from the outside coming in. Most of the things that make us sick are when we get out of balance. It's happening from the inside to the outside. Now, it could be that we're eating inappropriate foods, we're not getting sufficient rest, or some sore throats are actually caused because the person's not speaking up, not speaking out. And that can cause laryngitis or a sore throat, or over time, it can cause thyroid issues. So, but this is not what we're taught. I wasn't taught this growing up. So in the perfect world of Fleetwood, everybody would be seen by somebody who looks at them as a total, as the totality of that individual, and not just asking, what's your symptom? And let's shh, because your body's broken, we'll shut that symptom up. That doesn't even make sense. These bodies have been with us, they are gifts, and they've been with us our entire life. So when my body speaks, I need to listen, because when I don't, bad things happen.
I love that. And I think the prioritization too, is like which symptoms, you know. Exactly.
So like the guy who had high blood pressure, and the drugs actually push him into cholesterol dysfunction or dyslipidemia. And then he gets put on a statin, where the manufacturers of atorvastatin have a class action suit against them for pushing people into type 2 diabetes. I mean, we know this. It's actually reported in the news. And if you're listening, you hear about these iatrogenic class action suits over and over and over again. So, but when you think that's the only option that you have, that's the route you go. Do you need to get that phone?
No. I'm going to stop the recording though.